day number dos, session number uno. We got media. We're talking media with some of the biggest media nerds out there. Welcome, everyone. Before we get going, I want to hear everyone in the chat how that breathing session was. I got to do a few minutes of it with Robbie. Did that boost everyone up to 9-10s? I hope, because I saw some 6s. We don't want that, but that's doing better. All right, sweet. Well, I'm going to jump right into it because while energy is high, we've got 3 amazing marketers, writers, media moguls, entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to start with Amanda Natividad, is the marketing architect at SparkToro, which is an audience insight tool that allows you to see what your target audience reads, listens to, watches, all that. She shares content marketing insights on Twitter and is a contributor to Adweek. Previously, she was head of marketing at Growth Machine and content lead at Fitbit. We've also got Alex Lieberman, who's the co-founder and executive chairman of Morning Brew, which delivers news from Wall Street to Silicon Valley to over 2.2 million readers each day. I'm sure that's an old number too. I'm sure it's much higher than that now. He's also the host of Founders Journal, where he shares his daily insights and shares his learnings on Twitter as well. And then lastly, we've got Fadeke Adegbuyi, who is the lead writer at Shopify, which is the largest merchant platform. I'm sure you all know of it. And she shares her thoughts on technology and culture through one of her publications called Cybernaut, and previously was part of content at Doist, which I'm sure we'll dig into, kind of how you can apply all these media things to either build a media property or build a startup as well. So without further ado, Alex, I'll start with you. Put you on the spot with his head down. I'd love to hear kind of like talking through the early days of Morning Brew and how you landed on the angle and like the topics that you were going to cover. Like there are thousands of publications that talk about business and news, and some incumbents have been around for like 100 years. So like, what do those early days look like when you're trying to find out how you fit into that landscape?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be up with such amazing co-panelists. I would say that the true answer is that us being naive was our best asset, because my co-founder and I didn't grow up in media. We grew up in finance. We didn't know how things were done. We didn't know just how competitive it was. And so I think a lot of people, if you came from media, you would probably think to yourself, why would I ever start a company with a newsletter? Why would I try to do something in business media when you have these massive incumbents that have built brands over 100 years? But we didn't know any of these things, right? And so we just thought very linearly and practically without having previous context. And so, how it actually came about was I was in my senior year. I was helping students prepare for job interviews. I would always ask the question, how do you keep up with the business world? Every student was like, I read the Wall Street Journal and I read it because I feel like I have to, but it's a prerequisite to say I'm well read in business. It's dense, it's dry, all these things. And I say the Wall Street Journal, I'm just picking on them. It wasn't just them. And basically, we were like, this is crazy. Like these students are planning on having 40 plus year careers in business where half their waking hours are working in business and they don't have content that empowers them to do the jobs they're doing. Like that sounds absolutely freaking wild. And so started writing a daily business newsletter. At the time, it was called Market Corner. It was a PDF that we were putting together every day as an attachment to an email. There was no website. If you wanted to sign up for it, you would hit us up and be like, hey, I heard about your roundup. Can you add me to your listserv? So as low tech, high friction as it gets, but that's where we saw there was clearly something to it, because hundreds of students from Michigan signed up for this thing where they had to do all of the effort humanly possible to become a consumer. So I don't think, I guess what I would say is we weren't super tactical about saying this is our market, this is our product. We're more just practical of being students told us they find this shit to be dog shit. We want it to be better. And why did we start with a newsletter? Well, we started with a PDF. Once we said we're going to scale out of a PDF, we were like, well, there's only a few options. There's an app, a website. We didn't even think about podcasts at the time, or a newsletter. App is too expensive. We don't have enough money for it. Website, we were just like, there are 3 websites in the world that we think about putting in the actual website's name into the URL. So otherwise, how are people going to find us? So we said no to websites, and we're like, newsletters, like people in college use their email, you opt in, and once you opt in, you have basically said, I want this push to me. And we thought that made a lot of sense. And so that's how we came up with it.
That's funny. I love the friction idea, but that's really smart too on the figuring out how to people access your media, like kind of going from the back, like from the user experience point of view, instead of just saying, well, yeah, of course we're going to make a website and like being confident that you'll get millions of people. It's more like that's not how people behave. People don't just type in morningbrew.com. Like that never happens.
Totally.
Maybe it happens now, but
yeah. And you know, I would say, you know, we were just like very aware of what we knew and what our strengths were. And like, I would say if you were to ask me, what are my thoughts on creating amazing product? I would say you're asking the wrong person. I'm not the expert on creating amazing product. But if you were to ask me, how do you build incredible distribution with a loyal audience? I feel very qualified to answer that. And so it's just very interesting. Like, I always think distribution first before I think product first. A lot of people on planet Earth think product first before distribution.
Fadeke, this sounds familiar to like your publication with Cybernaut. Like you're part of a larger, I don't even know how you describe it. Maybe like a newsletter conglomerate, or like, can you explain what the relationship between your publication Cybernaut is with Every, which is the bigger parent organization?
Yes, so Every is a writers collective. It was started by Dan Schipper and Nathan Biches. So they previously had individual newsletters, super organizers, and divinations. And they were friends and just realized that there was a lot of synergies between the 2 newsletters. And they were doing well independently, but decided to bundle their newsletters on Substack together. And that really was the start of the writers collective. So since then, they've brought on a slew of other newsletters. So there's Napkin Math on finance, there's Almanac on crypto, I Write Cybernaut, which is on internet culture, and there's quite a few others. And my newsletter is a part of that wider collective. So I cover internet culture and write really long form pieces on online phenomenon and interesting trends. And subscribers can, they can sign up and read my newsletter, or they can be part of the collective and read all of them. There's also like, a slew of community events and other things that the community puts on.
What was the talk early on when they asked you to join about distribution? Like if that's the most important thing, like what was the agreement there?
Yeah, that was certainly a big draw. So I was interested in writing this topic, and I considered, starting a blog, starting my own individual newsletter. But one of the big draws of writing for a collective was the distribution. So they have, many more subscribers than I did initially, and continue to. So there was really just a lot of opportunity to be featured within their newsletters, as well as some of the bundled newsletters they create. So there's a Sunday Digest, for example, where they, do a roundup of everything that's been published for a week. So my newsletter right away would be getting distribution that it wouldn't otherwise be receiving if I started as a solo, media person.
Right. I definitely want to dig into the distribution in a little bit, but I want to ask Amanda first, because she came from one of the incumbents in a previous life. I'll let you tell the story, Amanda, because it's a cool story. But as a writer and what's it called, test kitchen cook for the LA Times.
Yeah. So I've worked at several of the incumbents, and who were kind of the earliest sort of disruptors. So my journalism experience came from one of the older tech blogs called paidcontent.org. And then I worked at gigaom.com, sort of as an editor, producer. And then along the way, discovered a passion for food and interned at the Los Angeles Times Test Kitchen, where I also was a freelance writer. So I've gotten to experience, what it's like to work at a media publication from very early days to sort of the true legacy kind of player.
Any specific takeaways that you still apply today when you're kind of picking up a media or like a content project that you saw that that an incumbent has figured out because that is their business, that maybe like a startup hasn't figured out yet because they don't have that scale?
Oh, that's interesting. So I guess the way I would answer that is one thing I was struck by at the LA Times was, I'll just call it the inefficiency that I saw in how they ran the newsroom. So there were things, so they adhered to, very high journalistic standards, which of course is important, but it kind of trickled its way through even to how they took photos. So an example of that would be, I worked in the test kitchen, so I styled a lot of the dishes that were photographed for publication. And each dish would take probably 4 to 5 hours to shoot, which was kind of insane, right? And we were publishing several recipes like per week, so you can see how this is not a very scalable process. And a part of the reason it took so long was because it was part of their journalistic standards to not do any real like photoshopping post-production after the fact. Like, yeah, they might kind of adjust some of the lighting, but for things like if they wanted the food to be shiny, maybe it's like a juicy ripe tomato and they want to look juicy. You'd have to use things like water or oil, edible materials to make it shine, right? You couldn't use like glue or anything like that. And I think that is a rule in food advertising, but as a newspaper, they don't really have to do that. It was a deliberate choice they made. So on one hand, I respected it, but at the same time, I saw how it wasn't scalable. They, had fewer, as budgets were shrinking, they had fewer resources to do this. And it just became this thing that they were spending extra time and resources on when they didn't really have it.
Yeah. Alex, what's your newsroom like? Like how quick can you jump on a story?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say is like, that was part of just like how we thought about the business in the early days also, is like, we didn't even see it as a possibility to build a newsroom because newsrooms are really freaking expensive. And so like, we were college students. We didn't even have enough money to build an app, let alone hire a bunch of people to build out a newsroom. So our view was like, where we're going to compete is not on the vector of like saying what happened first or doing deep analysis. It's going to be through the angle of understanding our audience better than anyone else and curating and remixing the best stories for that audience, right? And so the nice thing about that is it's called a 2,000 word newsletter, to curate the best stories and write, let's call it 150 to 350 word blurbs that are effectively taking the original sources, repackaging them. We didn't ever need more than 3 people on that newsletter, right? And so you can imagine when you start with a newsletter at 1,000 people and then it gets to 10,000, 100,000, a million, 3 million, but you only still need 3 people. It just like the profile from a business perspective looks really good. And our view was like, we didn't think our audience necessarily cared for what we were serving about going super deep. So actually like a lot of the benefit of a newsroom is, serving original content, original scoops, doing like analysis that you can't find anywhere. But the job that we were doing for our audience was keep you updated on what's going on in the business world in a way that gets you excited. And so you are not caught off guard when talking to your coworkers or your boss. And in that regard, that was the exact job we wanted to do. And so now as the business has evolved and we have like a whole B2B organization, I would say like there is way more focus on original reporting in the B2B organization than in B2C, because the job to do in B2B is helping people make better decisions in their job functions or within their industry. So we have retail brew, marketing brew, emerging tech brew, HR brew, and we'll launch a few more. And so for those, we have had to staff it up both, I would say, more significantly with more headcount, but also people who have more journalistic experience, because there is more original analysis and reporting that happens in B2B relative to B2C. And that was a learning experience for us because we did almost zero reporting in the early days. But what we found was like one of the best ways to grow our B2B newsletters is through original reporting that gets shared.
Mm-hmm. Curious, you and Alex and Fadeke, what have you found to be the difference between like a meh remix on like a take on a cultural norm or a story or anything that you kind of come across as interesting versus a really insightful and smart one. So kind of like what makes a lazy take from a really good take that stands out?
Yeah, I know with Every that we generally avoid remixes that feel kind of reductive or that feel very repetitive to what's currently already on the media landscape. So we have the luxury of really diving deep into topics. So generally, the pieces that I write, for example, are anywhere between 2,500 to 5,000 words. So they're really deep dives that tend to be more evergreen. And rather than kind of diving into just a singular trending topic, it's kind of broadening it more and diving into, what are the ramifications of it? What is the greater phenomenon? And I think that is largely what can be helpful to readers rather than kind of just digging into just one specific topic and kind of moving on.
Anything you want to add there, Alex?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Like when you're assessing a story that is already been covered and you're
Yep.
wanting to remix it, it's significant enough to talk about. What makes the difference between a lazy take versus like a very insightful one?
So I think one thing that I would say is that I think because we eat, sleep, and breathe media, our assumption is that people already know about the stories. And what I would say is for most people in the world, they're not reading the internet like we are. And so when Morning Brew comes out at, let's say, 6 a.m. today, right, at kind of like latest, a story could be 24 hours old, right? If a story broke right at 6:30 on Wednesday, the odds, as crazy as it sounds, the odds of a reader knowing definitively about a story that's 23 hours old is actually way lower than one would expect. Like the number of people that have told us they have replaced Morning Brew, or they've replaced the Wall Street Journal with Morning Brew, is actually mind-boggling. Like I actually would have never expected that. I would have expected it was a companion for when you don't have a lot of time. But as crazy as it sounds, like, and I don't know, by the way, I don't say this as like it's a good thing. I actually think it's really important for people to go deeper. But I think people are finding that reading something about something for 3 to 4 minutes, it is serving the job that it's supposed to serve. And they don't necessarily have the time to go a lot deeper. So that's one thing, is that even though stories are technically old, I think most people are not reading the news like we are. And I would say the second thing is our view has always been like, we don't ever tell the first joke, the second joke, or the third joke. It's really the fourth joke, because generally you need to get the first, second, and third out to find what's like really smart and what is like the take that only you could have thought about. So that would be the first thing I would say. And also, like, we don't try to tell laugh out loud humor. Like our whole thing is like make people smile, give people energy. But most of like the ways that we provide interesting takes or loop in memes and pop culture is what I would call like actually like kind of the native advertising equivalent of like non-advertising of editorial, where it's like every joke is a quip that happens in context in the flow of the writing, not as something that stops you from getting to beginning of end to end of a story. So very rarely will you see a sentence or two sentences that are just like telling a joke and not actually pushing forward the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love how you keep talking about like the job to be done of content, which I don't think really people cover all that much. Like that's a classic marketing thing, is like what's the job to be done that people are buying our product for? You don't really think about like, why should I read this blog? Like this blog is also accomplishing a task. This newsletter is also accomplishing a task.
Yeah.
Amanda, the company you're with now, SparkToro, like really helps anyone, but specifically writers could use it to understand more about their audience and like what they actually, how they identify and like how they think about the work they do and who they engage with. Have any surprises come from kind of helping out other marketers figure out like more deep insights about their audience? Do you have any insights on how to find the right audience and hit them with the right job to be done that you need?
Yeah, I love that job to be done sort of lens looking at content. So for those who aren't familiar, SparkToro is an audience research tool. It basically works by you just plug in a couple of searches, like things like my audience follows the social account Morning Brew or whoever it is. And then we show you a bunch of insights about that kind of audience, whether it's how they self-identify, like the words they use in their bios, the phrases they frequently talk about online, other websites they frequent, other press they follow, podcasts they listen to, all that stuff that kind of gives you those clues to who your audience is as a whole person. And so in using this tool, you can use it for a number of different kinds of marketing initiatives and writing initiatives. So like before this session, I did a search for my audience follows social account Morning Brew, because I was curious about like, I wonder what the audience is like. And then knowing that Alex and Austin started it when they were in college, like I was curious to see, like, I wonder how that audience has evolved over time. Like, is it still mostly college students who read it? Like, very curious. I mean, I don't think so, but who knows, right? So a couple of things that were surprising to me were I saw that frequently used hashtags from people who follow Morning Brew are like Ethereum, NFTs, investing. So just thought it was interesting to see that, Morning Brew isn't a crypto publication, right? But the audience who engages with Morning Brew, who reads Morning Brew, is really interested in like DeFi, crypto, blockchain tech. I thought that was really cool. And then to also see that the readership does tends to be, I think at this point, between ages 25 to 35. I love how I'm explaining to Alex, like, oh, here's how your audience works.
No, it's validating a lot of things that we didn't have hard data on. So it's awesome.
Oh, that's awesome. And you do still have college age readers. So that was cool to see as well. So it's interesting to use the tool to see, you might be able to validate existing sort of hunches you have about your audience. And you can also see what people are actually doing, right? Like maybe, for instance, let's take the Wall Street Journal example. I think that's a really common thing for people to cite. If they say, yeah, I keep up with business news, I read the Wall Street Journal. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just say they do, right? Because maybe they don't actually pay for their subscription, but they see the headlines. They're like, yeah, I read that. But maybe they don't. Maybe what they actually read is, Yahoo Finance.
Or just follow the Instagram account of Wall Street Journal and just read do the carousels. That's what I do for sure.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Or like the YouTube videos, right? Which I think the YouTube videos they do are actually pretty good if you don't know anything about a given topic and you're just like, what is Amazon? I don't know. and they give you the whole history of like how it was founded. You don't always need to hear that, right? But if you're new to a topic, it's really useful.
So if we were to kind of combine what Amanda just talked about of like identifying the things that people care, like your audience cares about, with what we were just previously talking about of like finding stories that matter, if we maybe I'll kind of like piece together like a hypothetical, and the three of you can chip in like what you would do differently. But like you could use that tool and kind of like find where what people are listening to and watching or whatever. Then you or your newsroom or whoever you kind of is creating the content could then consume those channels. So like if it's certain podcasts, like you pick the top 3 podcasts, top 3 newsletters, top 3 YouTube channels, you consume those. And then you have 9 stories of other people have written. Then you do your remix of your favorite one. Is a pretty streamlined way to create your own version of like your ideal audience and create content for them. Is there any nuance in there that any of you would do differently?
One thing I might add is as you kind of parse through the competition, or maybe not even competition, but publications who might share the same audience as you, who, shared audience, not really competition. I would also think, so one, I would think about, what I could do differently, what's remixed, that's fresh, but I would think about how that complements their coverage and think about the opportunities to collaborate. Like, well, I don't know I'll just say this anyway. TechCrunch and GigaOM won't cover the same story in the same way, right? They'll have their own takes on the different tech news. They'd probably never collaborate. But I mean, let's say you were an up and coming freelance writer or solo writer and you wanted to kind of build your name. You could pitch yourself to some of these publications, maybe like Morning Brew, but you could pitch it in, hey, here, I know this is what you cover. Here's my approach. And I know this is how you typically cover things, but I think it's relevant to your audience for these reasons. So finding those opportunities to collaborate in a way that you are adding unique value to an existing audience or a publication with an existing audience.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add here, kind of like similar to the point of what I was saying before in terms of like in a news cycle, I think the majority, like there's a 24 to 48 hour kind of like half-life of being able to tell someone about it before they found out. This is like why I think there's so much value to just curation broadly, even of evergreen content and non-timely content. Like I'll just give you an example. I was just writing a podcast episode about what is the most important thing when you start a company. Is it product? Is it team? Or is it market? And basically the idea for that episode came from an already like validated, very successful essay, but an essay that's very successful within a very specific community, which is like the Silicon Valley and VC community, right? Like this is an essay that was written in 2007 by Mark Andreessen. I used his argument for why a market is the most important aspect of a successful business, more so than team or product. But then I provided kind of like my own remix of examples to illustrate that, my own take on why I think there's nuance that wasn't talked about in the essay that you should think about, and also why you as like an employee or an investor or founder should be really thoughtful about a market moving forward. And basically my whole thing is for people who have read the essay, which I think is the minority of my listeners, like hopefully my remix and my thoughts are enough to paint a picture that they find valuable. But I think for 95% of people, they have no idea what this essay is. And that was actually service in itself to call attention to an essay that now they're going to go back and read, because how else are they finding great content on the internet?
Through Fadeke's. When Fadeke pulls something out of the ether, that's the other way they can find it.
Exactly. I just think that I really believe this. Like the vast majority of shit that I read no longer comes from Google, right? Like I don't look up to myself. Like if I want to go deep on something related to like the creator economy, I don't type in like best essays around the creator economy, because it's not going to have the most relevant searches for me. What I end up doing is like I literally text my closest friends who are into the creator economy, and I'll look at some of my specific follows on Twitter and see what they've been talking about. And I feel like it's an interesting thing where there's no, like, it's actually a pretty broken system. Like it's pretty inefficient to find the best content nowadays. And so if you can help like bridge that gap, I think it actually provides a lot of service for people.
That's
yeah,
such
just
a
to add
good...
on to that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Well, just really quick. That's such a great point, because if I think about great takes in the creator economy, truly it is Fadeke's writing that comes to mind too. And at the same time, she writes about like parasocial relationships, like kind of that next level deep in what the creator economy is or what it means. And those are some things that if you didn't know about that, you wouldn't know to search for it. Like you wouldn't search, oh, I want some good creator economy stuff. Let's look at like parasocial relationships. Like you wouldn't know that. That was something that was a novel insight that she brought into the conversation. So I just love that point that you raised, Alex.
And actually to that point, I think I'm just thinking about this now on the fly, but it's like really for that search, Fadeke should rank on Google for it. But like, but the issue is like the things that you are incentivized to do to rank on Google, like put you at a disadvantage to rank because of the amount of content you have to churn out. You're one person. It's impossible to churn out what like, you know, HubSpot's blog churns out in terms of the amount of content. So an interesting thing to me is like the sources we go to for the best truth or the most interesting takes are going to have a lot of trouble ranking on Google. That has always been our source for finding answers to our questions. So how do we find answers to our questions now in a nuanced way where individuals carry as much nuance and interesting take as companies do now?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's super interesting and super true. And I've been on both sides in terms of writing for search at a tech company and really, targeting keywords and being very SEO driven versus, writing what's most interesting and what is, perhaps more thought leadership or something that would be well received on Twitter versus well received by, the Google search algorithm.
Carrying on with that, Fadeke, I'm going to read a tweet from Dharmesh, who's one of the co-founders of HubSpot that he had from a couple of years ago. But it's kind of like it's been a narrative for a while, but he kind of put it really well, which is, and this is his words, modern media companies have a software company embedded inside. Next gen software companies will have a media company embedded inside. And so, Fadeke, you've experienced that firsthand, both at Doist and now at Shopify. They're full on media. Like, you run a media company within a tech company. Are there any nuances there that you've experienced that are missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with his characterization. And, my day job is working in content marketing and writing for keywords. And I think most content marketers would concur that it's increasingly challenging to rank. So it's also not a safe bet to rely on Google's algorithm. And on the other side, paid distribution is becoming more expensive and in some cases less effective. So I think an in-house media arm allows you to build your own audience rather than relying on, search and paid marketing. And I think we'll see just more and more of that in the future.
How do you get your content out there? Like, how do you distribute once you've written something?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we're thinking about built-in distribution. So it's very much, if we're writing something, who can we reach out to who can provide an interesting insight into this piece? And by, that in itself makes the piece better, but also provides a distribution arm of someone being featured in the article and being also incentivized to share it. And yeah, I've also had just a lot of random success with Hacker News, which is unfortunately just a hard one to game and like to make a repetitive, distribution channel. But I think there's something to be said for just being aware of what does well on there and just honing in on that and, bringing that to your own writing and your own publication.
One thing I'll just call out that I love about what Shopify does as well is I think, first of all, leveraging personality. So I think the fact that like Harley has become a personality in himself, that has been super effective to just like personalize the brand. And also, I think the beautiful thing about having a platform, like every way I think about distribution and marketing is a hub and spoke model. How do you, rather than going after all the spokes, which are your end consumers, how do you think about the hubs that have this concentrated attention of your spokes? And how do you focus on getting the hubs to distribute you? And for me, Shopify as a platform, it's arming the rebels, and the rebels are companies that have massive distribution. So you naturally, by what you're building, have a shit ton of hubs. And so like what I always love is like, it makes it so incredibly compelling and easy when Harley is like, oh yeah, 4 companies that IPO'd this year all have their stores on Shopify, right? Like imagine like it's just like a rising tide raises all boats. And like, I think the fact that a platform can plug into the people it serves or the companies it serves, and they have massive distribution as well, is a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I think a lot of media companies specifically are waking up to that fact. I think there was a point in time where outlets were nervous about, the stars within a company and how that impacts like overall views and distribution back to the company. But now it's seen as like a massive advantage. I know just the other day we saw with The Atlantic, they brought on just a suite of newsletters and a lot of personalities writing about really interesting topics. And I think that they saw that these people have built-in audiences, they have people who are already engaged. How do we leverage them to, boost The Atlantic and get more of a readership through newsletters?
Yeah. And this is something that we basically do at SparkToro, just on the kind of indie scale. It's really only 3 of us at the company, but we do kind of have like built-in audiences. We're fortunate to have that. I mean, one of our co-founders is Rand Fishkin, who, former founder of Moz, first person to codify SEO best practices, right? So we had that kind of built-in audience with him. And then over the past year, I've kind of been focused on building my own audience. So when we create content now, it isn't about how can we rank number 1 for this thing. It's, similar to the sort of creator economy problem we talked about, right? How do you find the best content? We don't think that there is anyone searching for the problem that we are solving because we don't think they know how to frame it into keywords yet. right? So what we solve is, how do you know what websites your audience actually goes to? How do you know your audience's sources of influence? Those aren't things that you Google, right? But they're things that you care about when you create content, when you do marketing stuff, right? You care about these things, but you don't know how to do that, right? So we do these, we solve this problem, but the content we create is more related to existing marketing use cases. So a pretty clean example of this is, we do these sort of bi-weekly office hour sessions. They're basically live webinars, live Q&As. We do a presentation, and then ideally we'll have a follow-up blog post that is basically the presentation put into blog post screenshot format. So I did a presentation on cold outreach, what flaws in bad cold outreach, how to do it better, how to write a good effective email. Did a presentation on that, and then turned that into a blog post, turn that into, well, the first thing I did was I wrote a viral thread on it to kind of generate interest in it. So these are all things that kind of play into each other, but it's essentially the same piece of content.
I'm curious to hear how so let's say you're working at a small startup, and you want to take advantage of the three things that you all just kind of talked about. We've got like hub and spoke idea, we've got audience building, we've got kind of like making your content build affinity towards your product, but at the same time educate them and make it's useful. It's not just kind of fluff. What would be your first three steps? Say if you had no content arm of your business whatsoever, how would you start kind of building out some type of a process around that?
Well, my first response would be document exactly why you want to launch a media arm, because I think that, just as I found, it's like everything is kind of like Pareto principle, where it's like, the vast majority of people are thought followers, vast minority of people are thought leaders, and a lot of people, especially in media, will do things because it is being done. So I think if you are a company that is going to launch media, you have made a bunch of considerations. One, why the investment in a media arm is better than the trade-off of taking that money and putting it into partnerships or into some sort of acqui-hire of a media asset, or into just taking that money and putting it into paid acquisition. Like, you've made all that consideration. I think the second is you being able to answer for yourself, how are we going to do this effectively when so many businesses have proven that they are highly ineffective at doing it? One, because media and distribution is just a totally different beast than other businesses. And also, generally, businesses are able to do like one core motion really well. This is a totally different motion. How are you going to prioritize creating great content when it is not your core business? So that'd be kind of my first step, is like really being thoughtful about, you've considered the trade-offs, because a media operation is just a shit ton of work. And two, you understand why it makes sense in your business versus all the other things you could be doing with that capital and those people.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think there's something to be said for having just a very unique value proposition. So there's a lot of content in the world. So what is your brand covering that can't be found anywhere else? I think that's just a crucial question to answer before you're getting off the ground. And another thing that I would think about that perhaps a lot of people don't currently is partnership. So if you're starting something from scratch, who can you partner with to get that distribution? So that's very much what the model looks like at Every. But I feel like I'm increasingly seeing new publications launch, and they're anchored around someone who's already prominent. So if that's something that you could potentially do, I think that's worthwhile.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of this. As a journalist turned content marketer, I kind of tend to think about some of this stuff as a marketer and like with positioning. So if I were to do this, I would get super, super clear on that top line vision. And it might even just be with a simple statement like, I want my media brand to be the first source for breaking news in angel funded startups. Like something just super specific there. And then I think to put that into a framework, it might be something like, I want to be, insert primary content type for insert specific audience, right? And then from there, I would get super clear on who my audience actually is and dig into those various segments. So using that example, like angel funded startups, who might be the target audience segments, right? It might be founders, first hires or first specialists, like the first product or marketing lead, angel investors, other reporters maybe. And those are all very different audiences, different needs, but with some of the shared interests. So I would get super clear on that. And then I would get I would focus on a couple of content platforms. And I kind of tend to think about this like maybe one rented platform, one owned platform, and one sublet one. So what does
Ooh,
that
what's a
mean?
sublet one? Can you explain that one?
So rented would be like Twitter, LinkedIn, right? Where you kind of like build your audience, where people already are, and you're trying to capture their attention. Owned would be whatever it is that you are launching, right? Could be a blog, a podcast, a YouTube channel, whatever that kind of owned platform is. And the sublet one is, it's something Fadeke talked about in her answer, right? Which is partnering with the existing players in a way that makes sense for everybody, right? Where everybody kind of benefits from that. So that might be like, let's say you were starting like a corporate travel, website or like podcast or something. What you could do is do some research in this in this sector. You could use SparkToro for this. And you can look at some other niche travel publications who you don't really compete with. And those would be something like Foders.com, skiff.org. Those are things that are pretty niche, but really well respected. And finding ways to partner with them, whether it's pitching a guest piece, if they accept guest pieces, maybe it's conducting original research in that space and then pitching it as a resource. Like, hey, I went through with thousands of these. I did a survey with thousands of people. Here's what I found. Or maybe if they host a conference, I would look into trying to pitch myself as a moderator on a panel. So looking at sublet opportunities like that.
Just two other thoughts that that this made me think of is, one is Amanda said the word like players, and it made me think about just like, I think a new way to think, and I think Fadeke was also saying before how like companies are warming up to the idea of just like working with individuals and empowering individuals at a time, or like where for the longest time they were like, why would we do that? Where we're putting company resources into someone else. I just think there's this shift that's happening, and you can choose to subscribe to it or not. And if you don't, I think you just run the risk of not being relevant. Is media companies more than ever before are more like sports teams than they are families. And what I mean by that is like, and it's funny, I'm talking about this because like Toby has talked a lot about like the idea of a family, but I mean this in a different context where like a family, you are part of a family, you can't leave a family can't kick you out. Like that is how I think institutions traditionally thought about individuals creating content, meaning like you're always going to be part of this. Don't think about doing anything else. And I think where the world is going is like media companies are sports teams. You think about a sports team, right? You think about the Lakers. You have players on contract. Those players can do endorsement deals and other collaborations. It's actually helpful for you because them being on commercials, they're effectively being funded to be an extension of your brand. And by the way, there's always going to be a few stars and then some average players and mediocre players. And that's just how it works. And so I think companies shouldn't expect that, like, if they have a diversified portfolio of creators, that all of them are going to provide equal value. It is going to be top heavy. That is kind of like how the markets work. And that is okay. The way you best diversify it is having both like a great diversified team of people, but also having a great pipeline so that if your contracted player decides their contract's up, they're leaving, you have active conversations to source that next star.
Totally. And to just even extend that metaphor, I feel like there's also poaching that people now have to think about. So if you do have those, stars on your team, whether they're writers or videographers who are adding a lot of value, then those people, there's something to be said for making sure those contracts are great and that those people are happy, or they'll be, poached elsewhere, whether it's like a Substack or the Atlantic or the New York Times or wherever.
And even from the advertiser's point of view, like if you're running paid ads, if you don't have your own media arm and you want to run paid ads on someone else's platform, you have to be comfortable with the idea that they can just have another ad beside yours, like a stadium would, where there's hundreds of different sponsors for that one single event. So much so that they're actually like tearing up. I know at hockey games they'll like go in at the periods and put up another ad because they didn't pay for the second period; they only paid for the first and third period. So good metaphor there. I love it. Last question for y'all, and then we'll wrap up. Just would love to hear any other like shout outs to any publications or content writers or individuals or orgs or anyone who you're paying attention to who you don't think is getting enough credit. I'd love to hear if you could share a few of those.
Well, I as a marketer, I follow a lot of, kind of marketing writers and newsletters. I really like Kushan Shah's Marketing Mind Meld. That's a really fun newsletter to watch. It talks about like kind of marketing psychology. I really like Raisin Bread by the Marketer Hire team. That's just a really fun, delightful newsletter that I like. Those are two that stand out at the moment, and there are more. There are tons of amazing writers. I'll shut up now.
So I'm a really big fan of all things internet culture, and a publication that's quite popular but a bit under the radar, in my opinion, is Rip and Farm. So I'm a big fan of his writing and follow that quite closely.
So I have two. I'm forgetting the name of the second one, so I'm trying to delay to find it while I say the first. So the first, this is all, by the way, like the bet that curation is just more important than ever. So where I find my best content is at readsomethinggreat.com.
Oh, that's great. Luis Pereira's site. Yeah,
exactly. Where every day it serves 3 or 4 essays, one about like business, one about technology, one about living better, one about like a miscellaneous. And it's just the best long form essays on the internet. And honestly, whenever I want to dedicate an hour or 2 hours to reading, if I don't have already things saved, that is where I'm going. And it's just like constantly good stuff. I can't find the other one right now, and I want to. But basically, the other site is curation, but going down the rabbit hole of people. So it's a site that has a bunch of individuals. So it could be like Balaji, it could be like Mark Andreessen, and you click into them, and it basically has all of the content across platforms that they have created ever. So it has blog posts, podcasts, Twitter posts. So for example, like I want to go down the rabbit hole right now of Chris Dixon because I'm trying to. I still think 90% of Web3 is bullshit, but I want to be enlightened. And I think Chris Dixon is the person who can do that for me. And so I'm like, I just wanted to dedicate myself to consuming 30 hours of Chris Dixon content. This is a site that allows you to do that for dozens of people.
Oh, if you could find that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I will. I will.
We're about to run out of time, though. So, Amanda, why don't you let people know where they can find out more about you and the work you're doing, and we'll go around the table.
Yeah, let's do it. So the work that I do day to day, sparktoro.com. Market research is super expensive. A survey can cost $25,000. Reports, focus groups cost $5,000. We're a lot more cost effective at SparkToro, and we kind of help you bridge the gap between what people say they do and what they actually do. So find your audience source of influence, sparktoro.com. We also have an audience research newsletter. You'll find it on the website. And then for myself, my personal site is amandanat.com. I have a personal newsletter. It's marketing adjacent. I include a screenshot DM interview with someone cool and an original recipe.
And the recipes are good.
And there's no backstory, so yeah.
And but you have to photograph it for 4 hours before you eat it. Fadeke, what about you? What are you working on these days?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I write a long form essay twice a month at Cybernaut. So if you're interested in internet culture, you can subscribe at every.to. And you'll also get access to a bunch of other newsletters in the bundle on crypto, on writing, on leadership and finance and much more. And also subscribe to the Shopify blog for articles on building a business and entrepreneurship.
You've got something big cooking that you weren't allowed to talk about, so keep it locked on her because something cool is down the pipe.
Indeed.
And Alex, how about you?
Yeah. So first of all, I found the website. I've just been looking nonstop since we were talking about it.
What is
it's
it?
alias.co, alias.co. So, just scrolling through everyone from Kathy Wood to Paul Graham to Jessica Livingston to Michael Seibel. Like you click on, it's basically little icons of their faces. You click on it, and then it's every essay, tweet, podcast, and video that they've ever created or appeared on. So that's that. And then you can listen to my podcast, Founders Journal. The whole thing is basically thinking about like how to sharpen your mind in order to build a better business or career. So I've talked about everything from like the mental models that Elon Musk uses to like on today's, it was like why market is just as important as a great team when starting a company. So that, and just go to morningbrew.com and, we have enough products now where I feel confident that you'll find something that fits your tastes as it relates to business.
Amazing.
Yeah,
well,
sounds cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a cool place.
Yeah, I have to check it out.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all, for joining and taking time. Thanks, everyone, for being awake this morning, or whatever time it is for you. I guess some people could be going to bed, but lively chat. And as always, thank you very much. And stay tuned for in 7 minutes. We got the next session coming up. So appreciate you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.